All right, so I want to make a video about how I've had deep spiritual trips and like how it's almost like there's a technique to it to get the psychedelic to actually work. And if you can master the techniques or find a technique that works for you, then you can get it to work for you. But and what I mean by work is I've used psychedelics spiritually for like over the about a decade now, like a little over a decade. And I've the first trips I've had were with DMT. Well, technically my first psychedelic was salvia, but like DMT is the psychedelic that put me into it because I was doing research on ayahuasca and the history of it and like because I first came across DMT through Terrence McKenna. Like I've seen a video in the suggested thing, and I ended up clicking on it. I had no idea who Terrence was. I had no idea what DMT was, but I was like, well, what is DMT? Like so, I clicked on it, and that was that. I got pulled into learning and trying to just learn everything I can about it. Then, about like 2 months after doing some hard research about it, learning about ayahuasca, how the main thing that makes ayahuasca work is DMT. So once I like figured that out, I was like, okay, now I gotta try this. So like I knew what I was getting myself into before. Well, I knew, but I didn't know because I'll explain that in a little bit. But like because the thing about having deep spiritual trips is it's no joke. The the funny thing about the deep trip or the spiritual trip, like if somebody wants to have a deeper spiritual trip, that is technically the bad trip that people talk about. That is why I don't believe in a bad trip. I believe in rough trips. Like trips can be rough. It could be hard. It could be like it could just be really rough to deal with, but it's not bad. It's just the bad trip is when it starts to get spiritual on you. So if you're not prepared for that, or you tripped and you didn't want to do that, then you're going to call it bad because it's fucking up what you was actually trying to do, which is probably just to enjoy a trip with your friends, or maybe you went to a festival and tripped, or maybe you did this and tripped. Like, and that's fine. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way to this. I'm just trying to say this is how I've done it spiritually. And my DMT trips were the thing that started it, so it gave me a certain perspective of psychedelics that's different than if someone started with LSD. Because LSD gave me something completely different than DMT did. And completely different than mushrooms did. But yet, mushrooms, ayahuasca, and DMT, they're all in the same room together. It's like they all live in the same place, but LSD lives in its own place, but in the same world. So LSD is just different. So but how I've had deep trips with LSD or deep trips with mushrooms or deep trips with even the plants and herbs that I've used. Like I used to have deep spiritual trips with blue lotus or motherwort, and people that know what motherwort is, they kind of laugh at me because they're like, "Oh man, that's just a nice calming herb." And it's like, yeah, it is a nice calming herb. It can help with anxiety. It can help with a lot of things. But also, take, if you know how to have a deep spiritual trip with mushrooms, you apply those same techniques to when you have a high dose experience with motherwort, like an extremely high dose experience. If you apply that same technique, you can get something spiritual out of it. It then becomes something more than just a calming herb. And I think it's all about applying all these different techniques to the thing. And like I said, I've been doing this for like 10 years. So a decade of me doing this, I finally like I can make a video about it now. But that's only because I've done these things hundreds, almost thousands of times, like practiced it so much and figured out things that worked and things that didn't work and all this different shit. So what worked for me was first I started learning about like breathing, breath work, just certain breath techniques, because when I started using psychedelics, it was because I was getting ready to smoke DMT. So I was preparing myself for DMT. So, and what do I mean? Because a lot of people, they can say, yeah, they've done DMT, but it's not like they took a year to prepare for the DMT. Like trained. Like you don't just go into football season without ever training. Like you train. You don't go into a boxing ring without ever training. You train before you get in that boxing ring. So I looked at DMT like it's a fucking boxing ring. That's just gonna knock me the fuck out, and I gotta be prepared for it. So I got prepared for it. And like I was preparing myself for, the high doses. That's why I smoked DMT the way I did. I made a video about that, about how I smoked DMT. But how I had the deep trips was learning about DMT, learning about shamanism, understanding that this is a spiritual thing that's going to take me to the spirit world. That's genuinely how I looked at it. Like, and like there was a little doubt in my mind, like a little bit of I don't know. I was curious before I tried it, right? I was curious to be like, well, are they just crazy? Is what they're saying real? It sounds real, and the people that are saying it, they seem legit. So like listening to Terrence McKenna, I'm like, why the fuck would he lie about entities in the psychedelic world, or the entity, like the mushroom entity itself, or the DMT experiences he had, and how he explained DMT, because he explained it in a similar way that I explain things, because I do trip reports once in a while as well, but it's almost like I prefer one of these. 10 years after working on something, I can make a video, like just one video about that something, instead of making individual videos about the times I was working on these things, like 5 years ago, or like even 8, 9 years ago. Um, and like I said, I did do trip reports and stuff, but like how I've had a spiritual experience with these things, I couldn't really put in words. Like I knew that I was doing breath work practices. I knew that I was working on meditation practices. I knew, and at the time, I was working on these things, training myself to get ready to use DMT spiritually, because it was before I even tried DMT. So literally a whole year of me just training for it, getting prepared, understanding what it is, and or as much as I could, because let me tell you, as much as I got prepared for the DMT, I was not prepared for the DMT. Like it's the most insane thing that exists ever, like, because it is the giant thing that is happening. It's so intense that there's no way to prepare for it if you smoke it right. Like if you actually take a high dose, like I used the like how I smoked DMT, I used an anti-gravity. So like how I was able to do that, and how even before using the anti-gravity, before smoking DMT, I was unconsciously training still for the DMT, because I was smoking wax, like dabs just got popular. Like it was like I think I started smoking DMT at the end of 2014. And dabs just got popular. I started smoking dabs in 2013, and I started doing, like, I was just doing giant dabs ever since my first dab. And I'm like, it killed me. But over time of doing dabs for a year, it didn't, I didn't die as much as I did the first time I did a dab, right? It's like I trained, eventually my lungs got trained to be able to handle the harsh, giant hits of like smoking some dabs. But so then when I went to smoke DMT, I was prepared for it, because like in so many ways, before I even started training my mind, like with meditation and my breath work, And then also I would practice. I've said this so many times, but there's this Bob. I watched an old Bob Proctor video a long time ago, and he had this practice on there where he talked about how to improve your focus, and how if you put a dot on the wall and then you basically like time how long you can stare at that dot. If the first time you can only stare at the dot for 5 seconds before you then look away, then that's the 5 seconds. Next time, try 10 seconds. Like, it's that thing that, like, that practice mixed with meditation, mixed with breath work. These are the things that I did before using the DMT. And then once I did the DMT, I then worked on applying these things to the DMT because mentally being prepared, even the breath work, all that shit was great. It helped me tremendously. And I guess the last thing is there was one more thing I needed to learn that I didn't know I needed to learn until I smoked the DMT, which was letting go. I then understood because I heard that term on YouTube, like I don't know, some it must have been around the time where I was listening to Terrence. But like I heard the term, but I didn't understand what they meant. Like what do you mean letting go? Like are you holding on to the chair and maybe you should let go of the chair before like I didn't get it. But I got it once I did it. That oh, I need to let go of everything. I need to let go of my ideas of who I think I am, of what I think my name is, of what I think life is. I need to let go of my attachments to like to the human world, all this other shit, my fear, my anxiety, my all this shit needs to get left behind in order for you to actually transition in to the DMT world because all this shit was so insane, right? So I was doing this and I kept working on it, kept working on it, kept working on it until I started understanding okay, the focus practice helps me look at the visuals for a longer, like, even though I'm looking with my eyes closed, right? Because my eyes are closed, I forgot to say, I would always wear a blindfold when I smoked DMT. Like, I'd just get a bandana or something, get a blindfold on, and I would smoke the DMT. And for the first 100, maybe 150 DMT trips, all of them were in dead silence. So pitch black in complete silence. And I would just smoke the DMT. And learning using the breath work while it's hitting because it's so intense and so insane that like if you don't know how to breathe through it like of course you're not going to make it through. And what I mean by make it through is if you don't make it through, that just means that you're kind of freaking out, just wanting to come back instead of wanting to go forward more into the world. You're wanting to come back in this world because of your attachment to this world and the lack of being able to breathe through the experience and just let it happen to you and then just go with it. Like this is where flowing with the river truly applies the most, where you just have to go with whatever the fuck it's making you go through. And then like because when you first smoke DMT, the first hit is so, like the first 5-11 seconds is so intense, so insane. Like but it's like because a lot of times I would go through this tunnel of light that kind of that looks like this. That's why I got that. Kind of looks like this. And I would go through it, and it'd be like a tunnel, but then there'd be like little rooms or pit stops along in the tunnel that I call sub breakthroughs, where they're like you go through the tunnel, you go through a sub breakthrough, and maybe you see a gesture entity, or maybe you see you're in a room that like where the walls are made of geometrical patterns and you're in this place and like you see these beings and they maybe look like light beings and they're speaking but they're speaking this thing to you and like it's like preparing you because at the end of it at the end of the tunnel there's what seems to be for me a city of light where there's light beings like I'm a human being. There are light beings that are made of light, where it's almost like we live in a carbon based we're a carbon based life form. it's like they're a light photon based life form. That's what it seems like. So I would go to this place a lot of times, and there was times where like, and I say a lot of times because, bro, I mean like hundreds of trips, hundred. Like I've done DMT like 500-600 times, but at least 100 or 200 of those trips were me going through the tunnel into a city of light. Like there was some trips where I was living there for over 100 for like 80 to 100 years type shit. Like there was times where I would just go there, and then like I went there one time and I was in like this rave type place, and like everyone was like raving out, and like they were all light beings, but it just seemed like a rave because there was a bunch of people around, like in this place, jumping, almost like jamming out, and it seemed like there was a stage or something, like that they were all like facing towards, and like there was something on the stage. But when I popped into that place, because I went from the DMT tunnel, then just popping into that place, because it reminds me of how like 1 second in a dream you'll be one place and the next second you just popped into another place, like kind of that thing. And then I'm in this like DMT like rave, I guess, like just partying out. And then an entity looks at me, I look at it, and it's like it just comes up to me, puts its like, I mean like we have a spine, so we can't bend ourselves like our elbow, but like he bent his back like my elbow, and his head was here, and he was just, his legs were still down here, and he was still just jamming. um and it was like, it was interesting. But I've had so many experiences in that place where then there was trips where I then tried to teach, because it went back to this whole time of me using DMT was because I wanted to like go in it spiritually. So I looked at it spiritually. So I just did the meditations, did the breath works, not because I had problems in the human world. I wasn't trying to get rid of my anxiety, even though I still had anxiety, I still had depression, I still had a lot of issues, but I was just trying to learn how to function in the DMT experience. Like how to pay attention to it, which that's what the focus practice was for. How to, when there's an entity in front of me, blah blah blah, doing this thing, spitting out meaning, or like, because the words he's saying don't really mean anything, but the thing in front of you does. Like, because people call it the light language, but it's definitely, there's some type of language that these entities speak where they then can create geometrical like thing, like meaning, and they try to give you the meaning, or it's like they're creating sixth dimensional toys for their kids to play with or something. I don't know. But all of this, the only reason I was able to pay attention to them and look at them is because I went into it spiritually. I went into it where I did the meditation because I wanted to pay attention to that. Like I didn't consciously think, "Oh, I'm going to do this meditation because I want to be able to actually pay attention to the entities when they're speaking to me and not just in my head freaking the fuck out." But that was really what it was for, because a lot of trips, I'm just in my head like, holy shit, fuck, 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 oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Like, I'm just freaking the fuck out because it's so intense. So, the times where I didn't apply the shit, it was a lot harder to take information out of it. Because if you're not paying attention to someone, how could you learn information from that someone? So, like if you're in school and you're not paying attention in school, obviously you're not going to know what's going on. If the teacher's talking, you're not going to know. But so I looked at it like I got to learn how to pay attention better for so the entities can speak, or so they can give me the information they're trying to give me, or so I can look at this thing more. Because psychedelics remind me of Medusa, where it's like you could stare so long you become stoned. And like, it's like you could stare, it's that old saying, you stare at the abyss and the abyss starts to look back at you. And it's like, okay, let it look back at you. Like, let it take you. Let it, whatever. Trust it. Because that's the thing that started happening. I started building a relationship with the entities in DMT. I started building a relationship with the entire DMT space itself, because the whole entire space itself seems like a giant organism of some sort that people would probably call God, or whatever. But I call it DMT, like, because that's how I got to seeing it and being in it. And like, the way I would smoke DMT, I would always leave my body, because I would try to like, what is it, sensory deprivation as much as possible. Like, I didn't need to lay in a salt bath, but just the silence and darkness, knowing I'm not going to get interrupted, knowing like all these different things, then helped me be able to focus to go into the trip. Now, you could do this thing with mushrooms or with ayahuasca or with LSD. LSD is a little different, but you can do this where you're able to just take the mushrooms, put a blindfold on in silent darkness, and let it happen. Go into the psychedelic world. Trust it, because that's the thing. I began to trust the DMT. I trusted it, which so many times I was then in contact with this female entity, which then I built a relationship with this female entity, which like I trust her still to this day. like I don't know how to explain it, but I look at this like it's real, and other people looked at me like I was crazy because they thought, you're just doing a drug. But like, bro, yeah, people, they don't know the half, cause like, that shit is so real. It's more real than this world. Like, that world feels more real than this world, because in this world it just feels like I am that light, like one of those light beings. It's just my light being is in a meat machine. It's in a machine right now that allows it to be in the third dimensional world. And that is a dimension that doesn't require a meat machine. But so I started to understand what the shamans meant by the spirit world, because you just get it. So it's like this deja vu of like, you already know and you just forgot, and like all this other shit. But like, that's why, like, once you start building a relationship with it, that's it. Like, that is the spiritual thing. Building, reconnecting with Mother Earth, reconnecting with the other dimensions, reconnecting with the universe, with God, with whatever you want to call it, but it's reconnecting with the higher parts of yourself. And like, just, and it takes work, because you almost got to train for it. Like, so when you're doing this spiritual trip, you got to train for it, prepare for it, understand what you're getting yourself into. And maybe you don't think it's the spirit world, but no matter what you think, you're still going to have an experience. And if you're not prepared for that experience, you'll probably just call it a bad trip.